Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. This is myself, George, joined once more by Tayte, and bringing on for the channel for the very first time, Aaron Gillingham from Aaron at the Movies, a YouTube channel which I've been waiting to get you on for quite a while now. So it's lovely to do so. How are we all doing tonight?
Yeah, doing okay. Nice light topic to talk about on a lovely, as we're recording Sunday evening. So yeah, ready to get into it.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Yeah, like Tate said, pretty joyous film to be talking about on a Sunday evening.
Oh, yeah, it's the light one. It's the longest David Fincher film so far at this point in the series, running in at 2 hours 40 minutes. A delightful Sunday morning experience. Right and early first thing, getting that film on, then doing a bit of reading after to do a schedule as you do, and just countlessly reading into murders. As people tell, I'm not one of those that watches the Netflix crime documentaries. You know, every week you see some name trending on Twitter, and it's like, how did this person get away with this? And it's the most ridiculous, insane murder story, and it's just always Netflix documentary these days. So, yeah, the Zodiac, the film, based on the book, of course, based on the real life killings, the open investigation that has not been solved. We had a great little discussion before we went live. We'll probably bring up little bits we spoke about, but I don't think I've ever mentioned the obvious. This is, of course, the David Fincher Retrospective too. I've really butchered that intro. It's been a long day, and it's going to be a heavy session. But before we get into anything, we want to hear from people at home. So please do comment with your thoughts on Zodiac, your thoughts on David Fincher films, where this stands amongst his films. We're entering a really interesting patch now where we're going to have different people, I think, jumping in, saying this is their favorite, this is their favorite. I think some people are going to be picking some that come up soon, some might have been in the past, and we're almost at the midpoint of the series. We've got The Killer coming out on November the 10th on Netflix. We're going to be leading up to that every single Monday with these videos. So if you're a fan of David Fincher, please also do consider hitting the subscribe button, and you can get us on our link tree with all the links on there. But before we continue, Aaron, it's the first time we've got you on the channel. We'll have all your links in the socials. We'll do a lovely plug at the ending as well. But just for people to get to know you a little bit, I'd love to ask, can you remember the first Fincher film you saw and sort of your thoughts on him as a director as well?
I mean, oh, blimey, what was the first Fincher I saw? I think it was back in secondary school. And it was, I know you guys have mentioned it a couple times on this series already, but it's one of those cases where I probably watched Fight Club at way too young of an age. But I remember I don't know what order it was, but the first two I distinctly remember seeing was Fight Club and The Social Network. Again, not sure what order it was, but it was one of those things where the first time I saw them, they very quickly just became like instant favorites, and I could not stop thinking about them. And very gradually over the years, Fincher has become one of, if not my favorite filmmakers. I mean, for a long period of time, it was Edgar Wright. And then in the last few years, where I've finally caught up on Fincher's catalogue, I think it's just seeing films like this, Zodiac and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, it just kind of cemented, like, yeah, he probably is my favorite, because outside of like Alien 3, everything else I've seen from him is either good or great, and I can't really think of many other filmmakers where their filmography is like that consistently amazing. And yeah, he's probably at this point in time my favorite filmmaker, and I'm not ashamed to say that.
Interesting. That's pretty great. And to be fair, teeing this up, we're going to be at the film festival. You're going to be attending as well. We know The Killer's going to be there. We know that David Fincher's going to be there. And of course, there's going to be screenings. So there'll be a lot of people, I think, looking forward to this heading into the next month. I know there's not been too many films out recently. I know we're pre-recording this. We haven't seen the creator yet. We will be. By the time the video comes out, there'll be reviews on the channel for that. So it is pretty exciting, I think, as we're getting nearer now, knowing we're closer to a new Fincher film. And obviously, a lot of people are also going to be able to check that out in November on Netflix. I think it's going to get a limited theatrical run. We all know how Netflix plays this game. They'll put it in like 3 cinemas for a week and be like, well, you had your chance. And they're all showing like 10 o'clock at night, which is always ridiculous. But aside from moaning about streaming services, Tayte, let's talk some theatrical stuff. Do you have the IMDb plot synopsis to hand?
I do. I have it right in front of me. Here we go. So, between 1968 and 1983, a San Francisco cartoonist becomes an amateur detective, obsessed with tracking down the Zodiac killer. in an an unidentified individual who terrorizes North California with a killing spree. Now, this is a very famous case, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this when we go into the review itself, because you've got the film Zodiac, you've got the book Zodiac, which the film is based off, and then you've got the actual events of the Zodiac killer as a third dimension that we have to navigate here with this review. But it's really interesting, kind of in the plot synopsis, they kind of, talk about kind of the time and talk about just the cartoonist, not really talking about the killer too much other than that he went on a killing spree. It's fascinating because a lot of the film is dedicated to finding out who the killer is. And the entire film is based around kind of, the different aspects, the different kind of points of view that people go through in trying to find the identity of this killer, the different people they interview, the different, leads they try and follow and everything like that. So very, very interesting. Just a little kind of note there on the synopsis.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't put this in a schedule, but what I'm going to kind of ask everyone in a really weird way. Not what's your memories of the Zodiac killings, but we're all British. We spoke before we went live. We were sort of comparing it that like Jack the Ripper sort of Britain's not version of this, but like in terms of the famous unsolved crime case, which is obviously like horrific within itself. And we were sort of discussing the fact that there are like tours of London for Jack the Ripper that would like, I wouldn't say like modern culture, but with obviously how many centuries ago it is, it's done and dusted. It's never going to be solved. It can't be solved, and it's very much part of that tourism side of London now, which is peculiar. But there is an audience for stuff like this. We did actually check. There isn't a Zodiac killing tour, thankfully. But with respect to it being like an open case, before I watched this film and actually heading into the memories of this film for the very first time, I saw this. I'll just say it again because we can write when I was studying it. When I was studying towards A levels, we watched this with Fight Club, The Game, Seven. We didn't do any that come after, so I'm not going to be saying that every video now. But I knew of the Zodiac killings, but I didn't know anything about it. I knew there was a coding of sorts, but I didn't particularly know what are the details, what the specifics, where is it, what happened. I didn't know it was unsolved. I'd heard of the case, but I didn't know it was that unsolved as a case. So it was really interesting on that first viewing, but also because I knew nothing going into the background, it made for like a very frustrating experience, which I think frustrating is like a massive compliment to the film because that's how they want it to be, that it's not solved. And, when they think they've got someone and they haven't. So kind of segueing that, I just kind of wondered to both of you, like, again, your memories of the film as normal, but also... I don't say memories of the killings, but like how aware were you of the Zodiac stuff? Because I'm very curious as to actually how many people know of this in detail compared to Americans mainly. I don't know if are American, if that makes any sense.
Well, it's very interesting because I was aware of the killings before being aware of the film. And the morbid curiosity of me knowing that there was a film about the Zodiac killings made me think, yeah, I'll watch that film. I wasn't watching the film initially the first time I watched it out of, oh, yeah, it's Fincher. Yeah, I want to watch the cinematography. I want to watch the performances. No. It was purely to find out more about the killings and kind of understand it a bit more. So that's very interesting because I feel like other people would have come in from, like you said, George, different angles. You watched it whilst you're in kind of school, almost as if you had to study it or something like that. Whereas, like, for me, it was kind of, my own curiosity, like, they've made it. I see that they've made a film about the Zodiac killer. I've heard of that killer before. Let's learn a bit more about it. And like you said, I was frustrated the first time I watched this film purely because I wanted it to be solved and it wasn't solved. I also was really confused because the first time watching, I was like, oh, I thought this was going to be, about the killer, not about a cartoonist who kind of is trying to find out the killer. And I wasn't fully on board with kind of the angle that it took and everything like that. But, I've seen it twice since then, this being my third watch. I've come to respect it in different ways. So that's kind of my history with the film in itself, my memories of the film. I think I would have watched it the first time around 7-8 years ago. And then I watched it again 2 years ago. And now I've watched it this year. So
I'd roughly heard of the killings. I didn't, again, similar to George. I hadn't really known much about them. I just heard that it was a thing that happened in the 60s and 70s, but that's kind of the most I knew about it. And then in like the early 2010s, when I was getting more into film, again, similar to you, Tate, I was like, oh, they made a film about it. I'm intrigued to know about it. But I didn't actually get to the film until a couple of years ago during one of the lockdowns, when I was trying to tick my way through films I hadn't seen yet, and I've realised there's actually quite a few Fincher films I hadn't seen. I think it was this, Panic Room, The Game, and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo that I needed to kind of tick off. And out of all of them, Zodiac just kind of stuck with me, because I watched it once during one of the lockdowns, and since then I just couldn't get it out of my head. And I feel like, for me personally, Fincher's best stuff has that effect. Because it happened with me with Gone Girl, it happened with Fight Club, where I watch it once and I'm just like, I'm not going to stop thinking about that. And again, with Zodiac, because I think it's Fincher's first film actually based off a real thing. Yeah. And afterwards, it on top of it just lingering in my head, I just wanted to know more about it, not in like a morbid sense, but like I was just genuinely kind of curious. I think partially because the case was unsolved, I was like, I want to know more about it, and I just want to know. I just genuinely was quite curious, and now having watched it for a second time for this video, I think I'm actually kind of confident saying this might be my favorite Fincher. It's the top three constantly changes between Social Network, Fight Club, and this. But after that second viewing, I'm pretty confident saying this might be my favorite.
Interesting. I mean, it won't be the first time I've heard that, which is what's always quite interesting as well. And kind of kicking off with that, talking to Fincher himself, if we go into some of the origins of production before we talk about his direction on this. And this is going to be really interesting. So we had a really good discussion on Panic Room last week, which is obviously following up from Fight Club. It's smaller in the respective of one location type setting for a film. Whereas this one, more so like Fight Club, is going back to that we're going to be going here, there, and everywhere to do this. And what I found was interesting was that the writer of the book is James Vanderbilt. Now, I've never seen the Scream films, but he wrote the last two Scream films, which is sort of the soft reboot. And also two other films he's done is The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. So a very interesting career post-Zodiac. It was his third screenplay, and he had been working on this for quite a while. He had originally read the book when he was younger, so he basically wanted to meet the author, who, of course, Robert Grayson, played by Jake Gyllenhaal. You know what's really bad? And I guess this is a credit to this film. I didn't actually learn anyone's names because I was watching this film like Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo, Robert Downey Jr. It was so... And again, it's not a disgrace to the film. It is just, I think, sometimes when you have certain actors of that prestige in a film like this, and obviously I hadn't even clocked the obvious, so I don't want to talk Marvel too much, but yeah, I was like, oh, look, this is before the Avengers, Mark Ruffalo and Iron Man together. Sorry, Jake Gyllenhaal, Mysterio. But I don't normally think like that with films, but it's hard when it was two of the main six Avengers. But what I thought was interesting is that for whatever reason, the script ended up in a very different place, as they always tend to do. Before certain directors come on board, it wasn't. I always forget the term. When people just the blacklist? It wasn't on that or anything remotely similar. But once Fincher came on board, this is where things obviously not just had movement, but it started picking up steam. We spoke last week that, again, Panic Room was a big hit. It had a $200 million box office off a $50 million budget, which is a fantastic return on this. And Fincher essentially lived in, I don't know if it's one of the murder locations, but he essentially grew up and he called the Zodiac Killer the ultimate boogeyman. That's the quotation terms for it. And he liked the idea that it was an unresolved ending to the killers, as not every case is solved. So his approach to this was to try and make it as accurately possible. Their research, and this is where I really do respect stuff for this. We did Titanic on the James Cameron retrospective earlier this year. The approach to that was they went through essentially the biography isn't every single person on board that ship to maintain accuracy, to maintain the story. And similar to this, the approach from Fincher was they wanted to interview families of survivors, people involved, those investigating. They were given complete access to police reports, which I find
unusual
remarkable.
For a film. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I don't know if this is a British versus American culture thing. I know San Francisco, of course, where a lot of the killings happened, it is just north of Hollywood. It is a lot of filmmakers, a lot of the industry is located there. Part of me was just there, like, I don't want to just compare things, but like, imagine if they just made a Madeleine McCann film tomorrow, and the police was like, "Here you go, have the last 16 years of documents." You'd be like, "Wait, how are they getting access for this?" Obviously, it's a bit different than that, but it's a very interesting case. And I've just said that out loud, and I would love to see those reports too. Sorry, but I really like the approach. This is way before shooting, that they would do their own research to a point. They hired a private investigator to track down one of the opening and closing scene. I forgot his name. Is it Mike? They had to track down the real life person through a private investigator because they wanted to try and talk to him for this film. So Fincher's gone in, and we've used the word perfectionist a lot in the series. And I think that's what's been interesting. Aaron, you mentioned it earlier. His films have this consistency almost from the get-go, except for Alien 3. And it maintains it. And I think, not my initial thoughts on the film, but the more research I've seen into this today and looking at it in the past and seeing what other people think, I've really enjoyed Panic Room. But the jump up in quality to Zodiac from a filmmaking perspective, I'm not saying Fight Club and Seven didn't have that, but there is something about watching this film where everything feels it's at another level. Frame by frame has been done to precision, to perfection. It's so cleanly shot. And I kept thinking of Gone Girl, which is so strange. But this is where I'm really excited to cover the second half of his career, where Zodiac's almost not a peak, because that's disrespectful to all his other work. But Zodiac just hits this moment in his career where it's like, this is the point we're going to start calling it. Not a David Fincher film, because you can see bits of it in his other work. But to me, this is a point where the perfectionist is coming on board and jumping into the pre-production of that, seeing those extra details, talking to survivors, anyone associated to it. There's loads more stuff we're going to talk about. And this was all before a studio had even picked up the film, which is what I thought was remarkable. It wasn't a case of, hey, they've gone and got a budget for this film. They've been dealt with the studio. Now they're going to go and do it. They were doing all this on their own accord with nothing lined up. This is the script process. And I've just got to say, you'll talk about Alien 3 a lot as his worst film. Part of me does wonder, as every week goes by, I'm there saying, is Alien 3 the film that's made him? Is that, if it wasn't such a bad experience at that studio, would things be different? And I always compare it to George Lucas, that without THX 113 out, without American Graffiti studio interference, would have never had, I mean, George Lucas is a bit different, but his almost empire of Lucasfilm, everything he did, his own rules, his own precision, was due to bad studio experience. And that's kind of what separates him and Star Wars from any other franchise and brand to me. I sit there thinking, has Finch done this? And I'm kind of curious of both your thoughts on that question, and I guess the pre-production side of it too, because there's loads more as well.
Yeah, this is interesting because it's a big jump, like you said, between Panic Room and this film. And I could see it in two ways. For me, if you go on to Film 4, which is channel in the UK for people watching in America, every now and then you'll see a film like Panic Room on there. And it won't be like, they won't advertise it as like, hey, come and watch this film. It'll be just on there as one of the films they tick over every now and then. But if Zodiac was going to be on Film 4, then they would be advertising for it. And that's the difference between these two films. One of them is very much a stick-on kind of anytime you like, kind of, have that experience, have that kind of tension build up over the kind of hour and a half, 2 hours of the film. Whereas Zodiac is a meticulous, intricate dive into the psyche of a serial killer. And he goes on to explore that later on in his career with Mindhunter and does other things based off that. But this is the part of his career where he begins to slow down his work. It's not kind of fast and flashy as it was with the previous films. This is where he becomes really intricate and really begins to build the tension. I know his other films had tension in them. I know they have tension in them. But this is where he would build tension up for just one scene over the space of like half an hour instead of building up over the space of like 5 minutes instead. He really likes, it's almost like playing chess, like in slow motion. He's just putting all the pieces in place and, you know, meticulously putting everyone into the right area. And we're going to talk about it as well, because you mentioned this before the stream as well. This is where he begins to be known for the multiple cuts and the multiple, you know, takes that, you know, he makes people do over and over again. This is where the perfection comes in. And it shows, because this film, it's 2 hours 40 long. It feels shorter than that, but at the same time, like there's a 3 hour cut out there that the studio didn't want him to put out. You can completely believe that. And you can believe that every single scene in that he wouldn't have wanted to cut, because he's filmed every single detail, every single little thing. Nothing is unimportant in this film. Everything has importance, and everything leads on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It's fascinating. It's like a director finally finding their footing. And it's not my favorite film of his, but it's definitely a defining film of his, because he's able to transform his kind of previous kind of quick tension, kind of like, oh, we'll kind of like build up to the height, build to the height, build to the height, we'll drop it. This is just a slow kind of like unease that just runs straight through it. And it's great acting around it. It's great cinematography around it. It's everything that goes with it. He's able to kind of build the entire film around that. So this is where he evolves, this film. That's my take on it, at least.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you guys have said, because again, not to say his early stuff is bad, far from it. Some great films in that early part of his career, but you can tell that there's like changes. Like, for example, I feel like Fight Club is his most stylistic film. Seven is probably on par with Girl with the Dragon Tattoo as probably his darkest. And it's from Zodiac onwards that you can start to see like a certain, not I guess prestige is not necessarily the best word, but like you can tell he's taking his time in that there's more attention to detail put into every single part of the film. And it does feel like a bit of a drastic, again, this is not dumping on Panic Room. I love Panic Room a lot for what it is, but it does feel like a drastic shift in skill and him as a director between the two films. And I'm interested that you mentioned the length, because the version that I've watched both times is the director's cut, which only I think adds like 15 extra minutes of like dialogue, which is really insignificant to the whole thing, but that still comes in at like an hour and 45-ish minutes. And with both viewings, I could happily watch like another hour of it. Like, it's that engrossing and it's that captivating that the 2 hour 40-minute runtime just flies by. Like, you don't even realize it's been that long, and I could happily watch like another hour or two of it. And I had that the first time I watched it. I had it the second time I watched it, and I'll probably have it again the third and the fourth and the fifth time. But there's just something oddly engrossing about this film. Like, the further they get into the case, the more engrossing it is, and the more information you find out, the more, not to kind of paraphrase a little bit, but like it's almost like you're getting put into the shoes of these three people trying to figure out who the killer is. It's like you're wanting to know, you're wanting to find out. And the fact that the film puts you in their position, maybe not as obsessively as Robert Graysmith gets in the film, but you do feel like, God, this sounds cheesy, like the quote on the back of a DVD, but it feels like you're part of you're there, as part of the thing and part of the journey. But it genuinely does feel like that. Like, as I watched it for the second time, I almost felt in my brain, I'm like, okay, so that person had all these traits that connect to the killer, but is it possibly that? And you feel like you're actually trying to piece bits together as the film goes on. And I don't really have that with many. I love crime thrillers of this nature, like with this year's Boston Strangler, which felt like a clone of this in some sense. But Zodiac still is probably the best at it because it genuinely, you're there with these characters trying to piece it together, and because it's an unsolved case, it's even more intriguing and fascinating because of that. At least from my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, it's really well said there, and kind of jumping into that too. For a 2 hour 40 runtime, this is covering 15 years. I think it's 69 through to like 83. So there's a lot that went on, and obviously there's a couple of years of silence. But one thing that's quite powerful with this film, and if you sort of move into direction, you know, everyone's probably at the opening scene and whatnot, but saying a film is brutal these days is like an understatement. But how many times do we see like murder films or horror films or thrillers where someone's like brutally murdered and you don't feel anything? But what's disturbing about this is almost not like an ad break, but it's like, we've spent 20 minutes with, you know, the police doing the investigation, blah, blah, blah. Let's just cut to the next group of victims. And I thought on the rewatch, I had no memory of that happening last time. And I thought it's actually quite an intimidating approach to the film. And one of Fincher's approaches as director to this was, if there were witnesses or, you know, anyone who got out of there, the baby's going to be the big talking point, probably the best example of that, sorry. It was included in the film. For any of the killings that happened where there's no information, there's no nothing, that wasn't shown. And I thought that was even more disturbing in a way. Certainly the rope, the stabbing one, the whole lengthy, drawn-out scene, how it's shot. There's no quickly jump, do this, let's have a killing montage, let's have them... You know how some filmmakers do it. Let's have a montage of them opening letters all the time. I love that this film is horrific in how they approached it, and I do actually think there's got to be a certain maturity for a director to do a film like this. That the last thing you want is, not Michael Bay's Zodiac, but for a case such as this, you need a director who's going to be completely blunt with how they're going to show it. They're not going to dress it up to glorify it. You need someone that can sort of point and tell you that this isn't great, because as pathetic and obvious as that sounds, there are certainly some filmmakers who can glorify violence such as that. It's a really bad take. So I love Scorsese, but you look at Goodfellas and it's like, look how cool it is to be a gangster. You watch The Irishman, it's like, this is how depressing it actually is to be a gangster. Same director, 30 years apart, two incredible films, two very different films. And I thought that was what was interesting rewatching to Fincher, is they're not afraid to go into that, and his approach as well. It's the little things with him that always work. That the blood was all CGI because of how many takes he wanted to do. It would take too long for the costume department to basically clean the clothes and go again. And I actually love that, because this is a director, as we've kind of said, you know, really taking charge now, where he already knows, I'm going to do loads of takes. I'm not going to waste my time waiting on cleaners. We're going to do this digitally. And without doing the whole digital versus practical effects type thing, this is like fantastic evidence of doing that. You're pursuing visual effects because it means you're going to have more time on set to shoot, and they know that they can actually do this visual effect. They're not going to mess around with it. And I just thought little things like that have made a big difference to this film, because the take stuff's going to be really fun to talk about later. But some of these...
Yeah, very quickly, I wonder, because we got to this point in the series now with talking about Fincher doing multiple takes and kind of actors, you know, making notes of it and going, oh, they made me, like Jodie Foster and Ruffalo, and they made me do the take over 100 times, just throwing the bag in. I'm wondering if, and we haven't mentioned it so far, Fincher did a lot of music videos beforehand, did music videos throughout his entire kind of tenure as filmmaking. In music videos, you have to deal with dancers, routine, things being kind of timed to music. Has to be absolutely perfect on the beat every single time. I wonder whether he picked up that filmmaking trait from that, and whether that's just transferred into the films purely because, you know, that's what he was used to. That's what he kind of trained his filmmaking with. He had to make sure that every single scene was almost like a music video. If it wasn't absolutely perfect on time to how he wanted it, to how he'd set it out, then it wasn't right and they wouldn't take it as the take. I'm wondering if that was kind of the link being made there.
Aaron, what do you think?
To be honest, that sounds quite plausible, to be honest, because I remember, I can't remember where I saw it, but I remember seeing this kind of behind the scenes thing that I know Jake Gyllenhaal had a bit of a falling out with David Fincher on the set of this film because of the amount of takes they had to do for these really mundane shots. Like, I think the most infamous one from this film is Jake Gyllenhaal's character just throwing a piece of paper on the passenger seat of a car, and they did it like 50, 60 times. And then by the end, I think they got to like the 40th take, and Jake Gyllenhaal was like, I don't think he had a full blown go at Fincher, but I know there was like a lot of heated debate. Like, I've done it the exact same time 40 times. What exactly are you looking for? And there have even been times where I've seen some of like the alternate takes and they look identical. And I can completely understand that coming from like a music video background, especially with some of the most famous music videos that he did. You can tell even those had like a level of like precision to them. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were carried over, if that was something carried over from that. And one thing that I found quite interesting, which kind of goes back to what you were saying with the accuracy of the murder scenes and how matter of fact they are, is the fact that I'm pretty sure all of them outside of like one scene were shot at the actual locations where the people were murdered. Because I know the murder at the lake was shot. They shot it on the exact same place, and they even planted a tree where the tree used to be in the 60s for that level of authenticity. I think it's the tree that the Zodiac killer hides behind isn't there anymore, so they planted the tree there for authenticity of what it looked like back in 1960 something. And again, I think that the opening murder, and I think there's one other scene as well where they actually went to the place that the thing actually happened and filmed it there on location. I think there's only one murder which doesn't happen in the actual location. But again, even that level of detail alone, mixed with the 50, 60, 70 takes thing, is something that when you first hear it, it's like, do they really need to do that many takes? But when you see the end product, you're like, okay, I kind of get it now. And especially for a topic like this, which is still in the, still one that gets brought up every now and then, and is still an ongoing case to an extent. There is a certain point where you kind of have to sit back and kind of applaud them for, especially Fincher, with the amount of detail and the amount of time and effort they put into every single piece of this film, especially in that regard.
I'm with you 100%. So I'll just quickly jump back to the music video. Before we did the series, I was doing some research. Obviously, we know he worked with some of the biggest names in music: Madonna, Michael Jackson. We've got a camera with YouTube. There's been a lot of music videos. One of the reasons where the perfectionism comes in is that because you're bringing on these A-listers, and these are like not your standard A-listers. These are, the Michael Jackson, for God's sake, like shooting a music video with them. The limited time they get on set with a musician for a music video such as this had to be perfect. So that was very much installed in him from a very early age. The more he did of those, the more into commercials as well as music videos. That created this is that it's almost, and there's no evidence of this second part I'm about to say, it's more my sort of theorizing along with it. He has spent time with these, they're bigger than he was an actor, but he is not in charge of that shoot. He is responsible for making the music video with that limited time he has with them. Whereas on his own films, my theory is that he knows he is in charge. He knows he's the director. Certainly post Alien 3, he's coming on board saying, well, actually, I'm in charge. I've got it contractually that I'm going to be in charge too. You don't tell me how to make my films. And this is what's really interesting when we hit the Zodiac point, that for the cast to come out for this film, I know there was a little bit on Panic Room where they spent like a day and a half shooting the sledgehammer from underneath the floor. An eighth of a page pales in comparison to something such as this. At this point in time, I don't think David Fincher is the household name of perfectionist on set. I think the actors are still discovering him. They're signing for his films. And they would have, maybe there's some internal memos somewhere. He likes to do a lot of takes, who knows. But I say this is the film where we start to hear more and more. And then in the coming films, it's more the case that when the actors are signing on for a David Fincher film, to me, it then becomes, well, what do you expect? You're signing on to a David Fincher film. It's going to be part and parcel. And you look at the final outcome of these films, and the actors are probably going to be like, you know what? Fair enough. Maybe not on Zodiac, because it was very different again. He's not at that point. But, the approach to the killer coming out, say, compared to Zodiac, would be different of Michael Fassbender knows what he's in for the moment he signs up for that film. And I do think the music video stuff comes into it. And I kind of, what you mentioned actually about the shooting on the locations, there's a film that did it recently, which I can't remember, but it brings an authenticity to it when they're filming in a location they know is where it happened. If you're a performer, if you're the crew, if you're the director, you know that there's like an enhanced responsibility to do it justice. I don't want to jump to Oppenheimer. I keep looking at the poster behind me on the screen. It's jumping out, but Cillian Murphy spoke. You see Robert Downey Jr., a great comparison, talking on set, saying, we didn't get to spend time with Cillian on set because he was in his hotel, because he's got the pressure of the responsibility of performing this person who did this in a Nolan film. And it kind of makes me curious is that for these actors, like, if you're tied up on the floor on the location where a serial killer happens, you're reenacting that you're going to want to not just give it your best, but you also don't want to do it shits, bluntly put. You don't want to just, let's do a quick take and get it done and dusted because I don't want to be here. It probably adds a horrible, like, gut feeling to it. It probably makes them a bit uncomfortable, but that's probably just going to bring out a better performance in them. Granted that the murder victims aren't obviously lead actors in this film too, but I think the whole approach, the direction, and what he's doing with this film is really interesting. And to set up a film in a few times, Social Network, if we're going to talk about it, there were 200. The script was 200 pages long for this film, which is 3 hours 20 on the standards. One page per minute. David Fincher, to speed up time, basically got them to talk quicker, and I'm like, it's kind of perfect that you end up casting Jesse Eisenberg then for your social media film. If you're trying to make use of that approach, and kind of in turn to this, we'll get to the cast shortly and soon, but getting Jake Gyllenhaal in, pretty great for what you need from it. But I just think from a direction standpoint, from a production standpoint, I can't sit here and say this is his best film at the moment because I'm sort of re-ranking them week by week in my head. And obviously when we finish out the series, we'll do our big top 10 videos we always do. And that's going to be really interesting is that when it's kind of making me more excited for his next few films. Gone Girl is the one that always jumps to my mind. I've got the clearest memories watching that and everything to do with the production of that film. But I'm really excited for Social Network because, again, I haven't seen it since it came out. It's the one I didn't really like when it came out as well. I was way too probably young to appreciate it. And I think Facebook was too new probably to have done in 2010. Clearly not. We don't need a second one, thank God. But yeah. Tayte, what are your thoughts on all that stuff? We'll move into the story after as much as we can because there's not much to say on the story in respective of we all know what it's about, but we'll talk about some of the big parts and heading into the characters, but just your thoughts on that music video stuff too.
Yeah, it's kind of how I feel about it. Like, he just kind of sets the rhythm and, if it isn't, it's the whole not my tempo kind of thing. Like, if it isn't there, then it's not right. And the actors, I mean, they must, I haven't seen any interviews of any of them kind of speaking ill of him, so they must kind of get on with it. And, just other than the one where you said Jake Gyllenhaal got a bit angry, about having to do the scene over and over and over and over again. But I guess it's kind of what you expected from the director. It's kind of he's the one who sets the tempo. He's the one who's kind of the conductor of the orchestra here. And, as an actor, you just kind of have to deal with it as long as, it doesn't break any laws or codes or anything like that. And he doesn't push anyone too far. So you can't really, blame him for it. And as far as his actual direction in the film, we do see some of his kind of signature traits. He loves using shadows in this film. He loves using long shots, a little time-lapse montage type thing as well. It's just everything that you'd expect from a Fincher film that he throws into it. It's not as I said, Finchery as his last film, Panic Room, which was like the most Finchery film you could possibly imagine. But he deals with it, especially in a setting that is back in time. It's not set in the modern day, unlike his other films, or even like Alien, kind of set in the future. It's it is kind of a period piece, and therefore, you know, he has to get certain things right in that sense. And I think he balanced it out quite nicely. The one scene I'm thinking of is the time lapse of the building being built, which, I mean, it's, you know, it shows the passing of time. It does feel like quite a modern twist put onto something that is old. You wouldn't expect that kind of shot to be, you know, placed onto that kind of film, but it kind of works for the film in itself. And it's definitely something that he kind of adds into later films. And, you know, he likes doing that as a kind of storytelling device to pass time on and stuff like that. He used a few different ones here, especially the use of music to pass on time. So yeah, no, it feels like a Fincher film, and yeah, we'll talk about the actors in a bit.
Yeah, I funny you mentioned the kind of showing the passage of time in this film. The first time I saw this film, and the bit where the screen goes black and you just hear music, I thought my Blu-ray was broken, because the screen just went black and nothing happened.
I thought it was an intermission.
Yeah, because I genuinely was just like, okay, I can hear music, but is the video broken? Like, what's going on here? But having seen it a second time, I'm like, okay, it's deliberate. Okay, cool. It's not just me having a heart attack over my Blu-ray being broken. But yeah, it is the fact that he does it not once but twice in this film, and they're two separate things as well. Like, you got the time lapse, and then you've got that, rather than, I can't think of an example, but I know like a lower skilled director would probably find like a cheap and easy,
just a jump cut, and then the tagline of like 4 years later, instead of actually showing some, or not even having to be visual, because in this film he doesn't use visual media for that. He uses you know, the songs and a blank screens, and you know, to show the passage of time and stuff like that. Just some form of media to actually show that there has been time like passing and stuff like that. And then having the kind of 4 years later tagline afterwards, just to show you kind of how long that took, because then you appreciate it a bit more. You kind of have a connection to it, instead of it just being like, oh, suddenly it's 4 years later, I guess what are they doing now, kind of thing.
I just love how he was able to kind of squeeze those little bits of just taking something very basic like a jump in time and trying to find like two very unique creative ways to do it, when like we said, and any other director would probably just go with the basic 4 years later sort of thing. And again, the majority of the film outside of that just feels like you're, to an extent, in terms of the structure, like your run-of-the-mill crime thriller within, you know, detectives investigating the thing, and then those small bits of like, okay, this is a bit unusual, but it's a unique way to show that passage of time, I think help not speed it up, but they help kind of cleanse the palate a little bit if anyone was getting a bit like, I don't see how anyone could get bored of this film, but it just kind of goes, okay, something is different. Something different is happening. And I think to go with the multiple takes thing, I think I did see an interview where I think Mark Ruffalo was warned in advance by Edward Norton about how many takes Fincher does. So I think going into the film, he kind of had an idea of like, okay, I think I know what I'm getting myself in for. So I can't remember where I heard that, but I think it was like on
Sorry, that's Ed Norton, the Hulk, you know, telling Mark Ruffalo, the Hulk.
I didn't put two and two together.
It's interesting with that stuff. I mean, I want to talk quickly about that black screen, because I thought against it. I was like, hold on, is something gone wrong at my end here? Like, can't hear anything. And the most insane thing, something I'm glad they did cut, it was originally going to be 4 minutes long. And it was just going to be music stitched together to show the passage of time. Now, I've said this, and people who watch videos know this. I am not someone that has good knowledge of music like the film industry. I'm thinking of The End of Babylon, right? Where it goes through the history of cinema through to Avatar still. I appreciate and understand that message. It's not something you can sell to the general audience unless they really know why are these films being shown. And you've really got to be in the know to get that. And I was just sat like, If this had gone on for 4 minutes and just was playing songs, I have no idea what the songs are. I wouldn't know it's going a passage of time. Only 4 years as well. The music industry is not going to change that much in 4 years to know it's a completely different year, unless it's the biggest names possible and you know what year it is. I'm just glad that was something. The studio asked him to remove it. He said no, but it did not test well with audiences. They probably did think it's an intermission. I don't think an intermission is needed because it's got great pacing, but obviously it was reduced to probably about 20, 30 seconds, was it in the end? God knows. But it's these little things that you pick up on and kind of sticking with that. Again, it's really tricky whether we want to do characters. I mean, story-wise, it's hard to talk about the structure of this film because the structure of the film is the characters, the events, and with it being the open case into the crime that's never been solved. You can't really go past that from a story structure. It does then come down to, okay, who are the characters we're going to follow for this to take place and for us to work out with them what's going on, what's happening, why haven't things been sorted. And there's almost 3 leads. It's not a trio as such. And what I really appreciate about this and the characters is they don't just force people to have scenes with one another. Yes, they come up in each other's lives, but you've almost got 3 different... Oh, God, I almost made a terrible GTA 5 comparison. You've got... I wouldn't say you've got 3 protagonists, but you've got, obviously, Jake Gyllenhaal playing the role of Robert Graysmith, but Ruffalo and Robert Downey Jr. playing Dave Toschi, Paul Avery, are both so incredibly important in this case, in the story, and I guess in the story for Robert, that it's actually quite a difficult challenge to balance the screen time of the 3 of them. Now, contextually, I think is very much worth bringing up. Robert Downey Jr. in 2007 is not the Robert Downey Jr. we know today. I'd even argue Ruffalo isn't as well known a name until years to come. And Jake Gyllenhaal is I think he's probably the biggest name out of the 3 in 2007, if I'm being completely honest. And he's still very young. I think Day After Tomorrow is probably his big film. Like Donnie Darko is a cool film, but I don't know if it's been anything bigger than Day After Tomorrow at this point.
Brokeback Mountain?
Brokeback Mountain, of course, sorry. That's the obvious one. And I think it's really interesting that we're going to obviously stick with Robert talking this and we'll bring in the other characters, but I haven't seen all of Jake. I haven't seen Brokeback Mountain. That's the obvious first one. This is one of the best Jake Gyllenhaal performances. And he's such I don't want to say unique actor. I really enjoy him as an actor. And I think we're at this point with his career, looking at it in 2023, where if Jake Gyllenhaal's cast in a film, you can... I don't think he's ever been typecast, but his on-screen persona, there's quite a specific way to use him. That sounds so weird. I'm trying to think of the right terms, but when we have this almost possessive lead who's going to be so engrossed within this case that's going to start to sort of take over his life. And I've also not seen Donnie Darko, and apparently Donnie Darko is the film that Fincher saw that was like, I need Jake Gyllenhaal to play this role. I actually couldn't think of anyone better for them to put into this role, if I'm being completely honest with you. I've got no idea what Robert looked like in real life. I don't know how that approach was, but I'm struggling to think of other actors you can put in this role that could do what Jake Gyllenhaal's done. I know you'll have like method actors out there, your Christian Bales, who probably could do a really good job of that, but there's always been something about Jake Gyllenhaal with his persona, how he talks, how he approaches films. Nightcrawler is obviously an incredible film of his as well, where he's able to sort of really go into that. But I just thought it was really interesting to have him as an actor playing this, this sort of joke about him in the office being, he's just a cartoonist, to the point into the film where like he's going to make this book and he's completely like lost his life. To the point that when the author was on board, he said he read the script and basically told them, I understand why my wife left me. That's a compliment of sorts, certainly. But what are all your thoughts on his performance? And I guess where picking him as the lead as well actually is more interesting too, that sort of side of it.
I like his performance in this film. I wouldn't say it was his best performance across all of his films. There's going to be a big debate over that because I really do like Nightcrawler.
So now it's a Nightcrawler. It's just stuck as like Ashness. Yeah.
Dare I say he should have been? He should have been given more praise for that performance in Nightcrawler. Like I said, I like the performance, and I can't really see anyone else in this role because he plays obsession so well, and this is a film where the lead is obsessed. And that kind of obsession is replicated kind of back with the Zodiac being an unnamed character in this film, kind of writing back to him in the end and showing that maybe he's gone a bit too far down the rabbit hole. He's a great character to follow for that sense, and having the other characters' interactions with him around that and around his journey into the rabbit hole, kind of whether he's going to dive down or not, is an interesting dynamic. However, and this is a big thing that I found with this film, which I hadn't found with any of the other Fincher films to this point, I don't see the characters, I see the actors. And you mentioned it at the start. And I find it really, really difficult to differentiate between those. I can see the differences with all the individual actors in other films they've played. Like, I absolutely can see that they have acting talent where they can define themselves outside of their own personality. But with this film, I can't do that. And I don't know why. I don't know why that's the case. I don't know if it's because they're not typecast in this film, but they're too close to kind of how I feel they are in other films. Like, for example, Jake Gyllenhaal plays a really good obsessive character. So what we're going to do, we're going to cast him in the obsessive character. And therefore, I see him as every single obsessive character in all the other films he's played. Therefore, it's Jake Gyllenhaal playing Robert Graysmith, not just, oh, it's the character of Robert Graysmith. Oh, and he's played by Jake Gyllenhaal. And it's a very similar thing with Robert Downey Jr. and Paul Avery. I definitely see him as like the character, not of Paul Avery, but I see it as Robert Downey Jr. playing Paul Avery. It's really hard to define, especially when these guys have had defining performances in their career outside of this. But it's really unusual that we've gone this far through Fincher, and I haven't seen that from any of the other films. Like, he's so good with his character work and so good at making the characters so well defined that we remember the names. We remember the names John Doe. We remember the names Tyler Durden. Like, we remember all of that stuff. But I don't know if it's because this is a real life event and, it's very difficult to attach these characters to that role. But other actors have done that before. Other actors, you look at their performances and you go, okay, you made me believe that you can play that real life person. This film, I can't do that, and I don't understand why. So I want to hear your kind of 2 cents on that, as to why that might be the case.
Funnily enough, as much as I adore this film, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, I like / love the performances in this film, but there is a point where it is like Robert Downey Jr. is great in the film, but I see him. Mark Ruffalo's great, but I see him. Whereas with literally any other Fincher film, I don't, like you said, I don't see that. Like, Brad Pitt is Tyler Durden, Rooney Mara is Elizabeth Salander. Like, I see them as their characters because they are so well rounded and they're so well realized. Whereas here, even though the performances are brilliant, there is only one character in this film that I would say loses themselves in the character, and it's not even a major one.
That'd be Arthur Lee Allen.
yeah.
Especially
Especially during that interview scene where he's being, where I think Mark Ruffalo's character and his sidekick are interviewing him. You just get lost in his performance, and again, like George said, I don't know what any of these actual people look like, so again, that might have something to do with it. Because when I think of the name Robert Graysmith, unfortunately, my head goes to Jake Gyllenhaal in this. But that one scene with that performance is the one time in the film where I'm like, I'm lost in your performance and you are legitimately making me believe that you are said person, whereas all the others are like, you are great in that performance, but I still see Jake Gyllenhaal, I still see Robert Downey Jr., I still see Mark Ruffalo. And on a similar note with the Zodiac killers themselves, one thing I found interesting before, it was after I watched it for the second time, during the murder scenes, I think they basically got different actors to play the Zodiac each separate time. And I find that really fascinating. I mean, they don't get really lost in their performances because you don't see their faces in the film. But again, that's just another great bit of attention to detail. I know it's a bit off piece, but I just love that little tidbit.
Not that we'd know, but I always wondered: is there like sort of legal repercussions for that? Had they have cast? Oh God, I forgot his name. John Carroll Lynch, the actor. If he'd have played the Zodiac killer in the murder scenes,
yes, there would have been.
I could
There would have
imagine
absolutely been legal repercussions.
Yeah,
but I love the fact that even so, they still did different actors for the different scenes. Not that he would just hide this guy to play him in 3 separate scenes. I really like that approach because you can't look at the performance and see how ambiguous it is. They've each been shot differently. They've each shot different environments, and it's really interesting how they sort of did that. And like going back to the question of the trio as well, it's interesting the way we've sort of spoke. But I think for Jake Gyllenhaal, certainly because Nightcrawler came out after, that's almost like not a progression of this, but that's sort of we're taking these character types, this individual, and here's a defining performance of you in the lead role for this. I look at Robert Downey Jr. and obviously, you know, the first thing I saw him in was Iron Man. I'm sure many people will say that. So when I got to watch this in 2012, I'm like, oh, it's Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man. The Avengers has just come out. Oh, I've seen Tropic Thunder. Love Tropic Thunder. I've seen Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. And it's one of them where it's such an important film for his career too. But what's really interesting is that I don't want to sit here and say, oh, had this have been done today, things would be different with Robert Downey Jr. because we just had Oppenheimer, which is really interesting. Without sort of segueing into Downey Jr. too much, one of the reasons I've been really curious, and this is not tribal or fanboyism or whatever we want to call it, but when he did the interview, I'm sure we've all seen the clip at the Oppenheimer red carpet when he says it's the best film he's ever been in. And one of the top replies was, "I'm sorry, but that's Zodiac." I respect the opinion, but I did think, and I was like, again, it's been a while since I've seen Zodiac, and what's really fascinating about RDJ is that we're in this point of his career, which I still think there's an entire audience out there who might actually start discovering his older films because of Oppenheimer. And you have The Return, and it was not Iron Man. He didn't just make Iron Man that changed his career. It was this build-up of a couple of years. You had Kiss Kiss Bang Bang that came out. And he would joke saying it flopped the box office, but it was a very well-received film, popular film at the time within the industry. Then he does Zodiac, which is, again, he's playing... Wow. Avery ends up going to addiction as his coping mechanism, putting Downey Jr. in that role. Fair play for him for taking that too. He then shoots Iron Man. And I believe he shoots Tropic Thunder straight after he shoots Iron Man 1. So the audience has not had Iron Man come out yet to go. We know, obviously, at the time Tropic Thunder coming out, Iron Man had come out, obviously, but industry perspective, audience perspective, he hadn't had a massive hit, he then got cast in Tropic Thunder. This was all part of his, his big comeback. And it's probably, if I'm being genuinely honest, someone please comment if I'm wrong. I genuinely believe it's the biggest comeback an actor's ever made in their career, purely because they'd go on to be the biggest star on the planet in like a 10-year run of films, the most successful films ever, the highest paid actor ever in those 10 years, the films he's doing, who now is at a point where he doesn't even need to work. He's picking projects like Oppenheimer because he wants to, not because he needs to. And I just think Zodiac's so important because not that we've missed out on his career with Marvel. I'm not slating his run of Marvel at all. I don't think it's fair sometimes on some actors. Like some of them are frustrating. They sound like a 10-picture deal, then yeah, that's on them. They're going to get called in to do work. But with Robert Downey Jr., there's just something been different that they will come to him to beg him to be in their films. And I just think that he didn't do too many films in between the Iron Man stuff, which is understandable because of how long it takes to film this, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that he had a couple of films before Iron Man wasn't just like, great, he did a blockbuster and now he's been typecast doing these action films. He was far from that. And I just think Zodiac's a film of his where you can look back and you can think it's him in a completely different role. He's not cracking jokes. He's not doing this. And kind of missed that. And again, if we'd been doing this series before Oppenheimer came out, I'd probably be very different on the Robert Downey Jr. conversation. I'd be like begging for him to do a film again. Like, please come back to acting. But we've had the return, and I still maintain I think he's going to be winning Best Supporting Actor come March. Yes, it's too early to make predictions still, but
it's him or Ryan Gosling.
It's one of the two. And
I'd be happy with either. I'm a massive Ryan Gosling person, but I would be happy if either of them got that.
It's so funny, and I know this is not the time to have the conversation, but it does seem to genuinely be shaping up that Barbie versus Oppenheimer might actually be happening at the Oscars as well. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm glad that you brought up Aaron, John Carroll Lynch, because last month I watched The Founder for the first time, and I saw him in that film, and I thought, wow, he's one of those actors I see pop up all the time. I've seen him in Fargo. There's another film I've seen him, but I can't remember the name of it. But he's one of those actors who's always on the bubble. But with this film, he steals the show in a very few scenes he's in. He's absolutely fantastic. He's on edge. You immediately throw suspicion on him. And for part of the film, you believe it. You really do believe that he might actually be the Zodiac killer. All the signs point to him, and then they just kind of drop the whole, nope, not him. And you're like, what do you mean it's not him? Kind of thing. He does such a good job in that role of playing Arthur Lee Allen, who was one of the only ever two named suspects for this case. The other one, who is now a recent case that they've thrown suspicion on in recent years. So for a very, very, very long time, everyone believed that he was the one who did it. To play that kind of role, to play that kind of character, to have that suspicion thrown on you, and to also act suspiciously around it, it's excellent. It's brilliant. I think it. I know that there is some good performance in this film. He has the best performance out of all of them. He absolutely steals the show. Yeah,
I said it earlier, but you've got three brilliant actors at the center, but my favorite performance is him. He's just so good in the little screen time he's given, and he doesn't even need to do much as well, because there's even that scene where Robert Graysmith goes into the store
at the end.
And he just shoots him a look, and then his face goes from smile to serious. It's just, he doesn't need to do much, but it just works. And I think what even impressed me more on the second viewing is because I really thought about this, and I hadn't really seen him in much outside of this other than comedies, because I think the only real one that sticks in my head is Crazy Stupid Love. And again, seeing that transition from that to this is I wish he was given more to do in other films, because this just proves how good he is and what he can do with very little. Because you've got the interrogation scene, you've got the small moment in the shop that I just mentioned. There's a couple of moments where he goes from not lovable. That's not the right word. He goes from genuinely just
passable, just normal. Yeah,
just a normal looking human being, and then there's a threatening undertone at just the drop of a hat, and it's just I'm now really unsettled, and I'm genuinely thinking it is you. And I think for the first time I saw the film, I was 99.9% convinced it's him. It's got to be him. And I think, again, the film does a really good job of kind of making you go, is it this person? Is it that person? Oh, maybe not. Or is it this new person that's brought into the fray? No, it's this person. And it kind of plays with your head a little bit. And I think his performance kind of has a big deal to play in the uncertainty of that, and having you keep being on your toes, because one minute you do think it is him, and then the film says, no, it isn't. And I that's one thing I loved about this film, but like you guys said at the start, it is quite infuriating, but in a good way.
It's a really interesting point you made there, and what I kind of love with it is he's in two scenes, right?
Yeah.
To have that impact in two scenes of a 2-hour 40 film, and come out. I remember hating him when I first watched. I was like, it's fucking him. Arrest him. You know the meme from Shotgun Navago. It's like arrest this man. That's exactly how I felt watching it, and he's detestable from the moment. It's like, I speak to my neighbor, but she died the week after, and like, ooh, yeah. And it's the comments, and I know, obviously, it's adapting the book, and the book implies that it is him. I know that the director's intentions is to also imply it is him. And that is the fundamental belief up until recent years, which we'll talk about at the end. And I just think it's really interesting. And even when you get to the final text end, it's like, yes, they were due to interview him, but he died just before. And you're like, for fuck's sake. Like, do you know what I mean? And that's what I kind of love. And it's that Fincher approach that he's known about the ending. That's why he's wanting to do this film. And I just think if you don't get this character right, that final hour is going to struggle. It's the build-up. It's these little things, it's, he's got a Zodiac watch too. He's not trying to make stuff up. He's not hiding around it. He has meticulously planned out these things while making these horrendous comments. And it's that bit at the end of the interview when he's like, I just hope one day they can stop calling police pigs. And it's like, he is so, he's been waiting for the moment to be interviewed. And what I found insane, doing some real-life research, right? So it's not funny, but it sort of sums up, I guess, like the American justice system. Obviously, we know he's a nonce in this. I guess it's like trigger warning for that sort of stuff. In real life, in the 80s, he got done for being a paedophile again, for touching up a 12-year-old boy in the 80s. Got charged. And he served 2 years in prison. And I was just there like... Again, okay, it's the 1980s, right? And I don't know how the Americans run it. And I'm scared of saying something that could really get me. I'm just sat here at the point of saying, like, in one of the most corrupt systems and countries the world's ever witnessed, where we see people on death row for stuff they blatantly didn't commit because a white person told them, like, this person robbed me, who can spend decades in jail without consequences. How is this nonce done 2 years for touching a 12-year-old boy? Surely the American justice system we know and hear about could just have chucked it all on him at that exact same moment and been like, not only is he a pedo, he's a Zodiac killer. Let's just end this, tighter than not, say we're done. That's just me being frustrated that it didn't solve the case. But yeah, it's such a good performance. And you know what? I'm not going to sit here and say, I know the Zodiac killer, I know this, I don't know this. If I didn't hate him performance-wise, because of how great that performance is, I wouldn't have been thinking of this. I wouldn't be fuming. You know what I mean? So it's really interesting. And also talking of sort of comedic roles as well. Charles Fleischer playing Bob Vaughn, bringing in a comedian for a horror scene. The basement, the build-up, I drew those, not him. That's terrifying. And I love this thing, and we talk about it often. And I think it's sort of one of these unconfirmed sort of Hollywood things where I do think comedians can do drama better than dramatic actors can do comedy. And I think at this point in life, a lot of people can probably agree with that. There's obviously going to be exceptions on both times, but the amount of dramatic actors that are just terrible at comedies is always very telling. And I just think it was so sinister that, again, the two scenes we've almost had suspects, and the genius of the scene with Bob Vaughn's character, you detract from thinking about Arthur Lee Allen for 20 minutes. It takes you out of it. It's near the end of the film. You think it's him. Is he going to get out the door? What's going to happen? And then a couple of moments after, it's back to it's Allen again. And that's almost representing that it's an unsolved case that we don't know. If this was a solved case, if we knew it was Lee Arthur Allen, we wouldn't be getting the basement scene. And that's in the book. That's the author spoke about it. He's convinced that happens. We'll never know if is that getting to his head, is the paranoia of him spending his life doing this, or did that happen? Could it have been this person? I just think it poses such great questions. And again, if the direction is on point, if we're not being presented with this the way we are, we wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't believe he's in peril if it's not been directed in a way like it has. And really, ironically, doing that scene a week after we've watched Panic Room, I think actually really worked, because it is that one location horror sequence type thing. But yeah, what were your kind of thoughts, I guess, on that little scene as well? Because I know we'll probably talk about that. But again, that's two actors known for comedies taking on potentially the murder role.
Yeah, it's a tense scene. And like you said, it distracts the viewer for about 15, 20 minutes away from it being possibly Arthur Lee Allen. And it really takes its time building up the tension. And this is what I was talking about earlier. Instead of Fincher taking 5-10 minutes for one scene, like in Panic Room, where they've got 2 or 3 minutes of planning. Okay, as soon as they go downstairs, we're going to get out of the room. We're going to grab a phone. They then have 2 or 3 minutes executing that, and the tension builds during that scene. Instead, with this film, you have kind of the slow build up of, okay, we know earlier on in the film that he worked as a projectionist, and he may be the one, there may be a link there. He may have done the posters there. He then goes to the house of the person who has the posters because it's his last lead. He then goes, he's so sure of it, he's like, no, he did the posters, and then, he just turns around and goes, no, I did the posters. And he's like, oh, and that's where it starts to rack up. And then he goes down into the basement and it starts to rack up even more and even more. And suddenly you can see his brain turning. And this is where kind of Jake Gyllenhaal's acting really comes into it, because you can see he is absolutely on edge. And as an audience, we are also absolutely on edge. And it's just a small little turn. It's just enough doubt thrown in just to make you kind of convinced of something else. And that's just a sign of a good filmmaker straight away. And it's a brilliant, brilliant scene. It's tense. It's got serial killer vibes written all over it. And I think it makes use of, other films that, put, serial killer in the basement kind of stuff, think Silence of the Lambs and everything like that. It adds that tension based on what we already know from these kind of films and what we know from horror films and people getting killed in that situation. So all of our senses are screaming fight or flight. And that's exactly what you'd expect from a perfect kind of tense scene.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Again, especially in his career, going from Panic Room to this, it's interesting seeing him apply those same things, but just in a couple of specific scenes. Because outside of the basement scene, I think the only other time the film gets really tense is possibly the woman and the baby in the car. But even then, it's the basement one sticks out for a lot of people, ourselves included, as like the standout scene because of how well it's executed, how well it's acted. And when you put those two scenes side by side, the interview with Arthur Lee Allen and the basement scene, there's just really good at showcasing. Again, this is mostly down to those actors' performances, but they really do a good job of showcasing these people as a possible threat. Like the poster writer in the basement scene, like, again, at the time of the placement of that scene in the film, you have no initial like thought going in your head that like, oh, this guy's not it. He's just, he's just there to be another lead. But then it very quickly and very suddenly, the scene just fills with dread and suspension. And I just love the very quick turn of, oh, this is all right and everything's okay. And then all of a sudden, oh God, something could possibly happen. Or like we're starting to figure out stuff that we didn't know before. And again, you get a similar sort of thing with that interview scene with Arthur Lee Allen, in just the way he says the things, like you mentioned earlier, George. Like he says one thing and there's like, oh, but the woman died earlier. And I think there is one line in that interview, I think it's the very last thing he says to the detectives, where he just looks, it's almost like he's looking directly down the camera and he goes, well, even if I was the Zodiac, I wouldn't tell you. And it's just the way he delivers that line right down the camera. He just kind of says it very nonchalantly, but saying something like that in the manner he says it is just like, there's something really, along with everything else he says in that interview, it's just like, I'm like I said earlier, I'm 99.9% sure it's you, and I want them to arrest you right now, please.
It's just one of those, not like uncanny. I'm trying to think. It's like unsettling performance that's done so well, and I think to the credit, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful to John Carlin Driver, that respect that we see, right, Jake Gyllenhaal, Ruffalo, and Robert Downey Jr. as themselves. If you'd have like cast an actor in this role who would like go on to be this like humongous star for 16 years, it'd probably alter how he comes across in a film such as this. And it doesn't, thankfully. Not to discredit any of that. But I do think that it sort of helps with that. And again, it brings a legacy that for an unsolved case, you got that prime suspect that everyone wants it to be. There's just got to be that disgusting. And as you mentioned, Aaron, the video store scene at the end, it is like the Are you here for the reason I think you're here, or am I here for the reason I think is you? And I love that build-up, and that is the sort of the definitive ending you needed for those characters, for the two of them.
When I rewatched that scene again, the one in the store near the end, I could remember. I swear in my head, I could remember there being some dialogue, but when I watched it again, it's just silent. They just look at each other.
It's better without dialogue.
Yeah, but for some reason, my head was like, I swear someone says something like right about now, but they just look at each other, and then like the very slow turn and out the shop that Jake Gyllenhaal does because he's like suddenly starting to figure stuff out. I do agree with you. It doesn't need dialogue, but I don't know why. In my head, I was like, someone says something right about now, and then nothing gets said at all.
I was thinking of that awful Jake Gyllenhaal Strangely Wild pun from last year, but I'm not gonna talk about that. But let's I mean, soundtrack's not been too much of a big focus on the Fincher films. If we move on to that, and what I do like of this one is that he wanted the soundtrack very Tarantino-esque at this point in time. I'm going to bring up. There's no original soundtrack recorded, no composer brought on board. It is very much songs from the time. There's not a Tarantino in the sense of popular songs that everyone knows. I'm not saying Tarantino does that, but it is a very specific chosen playlist. And I'm going to make a Once Upon a Time in Hollywood comparison. At one point in time, they were going to be using broadcast from a radio station. Again, contextually to use as a narrative function. They didn't, which is interesting. Obviously, Tarantino would then do it for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Probably wasn't going to change his mind. Both films sort of set in 1969 as well, actually. But what were your thoughts on I'll be really honest. The thoughts on the soundtrack. I know we've said this in a few Finch films now. I didn't particularly notice it. I'm so engrossed in the story, the characters, the dialogue that any music playing, I couldn't tell you a single song if I'm being really honest. It's not the purpose of the film, but I like that Finch has tried to do it I'm demonstrating where we are by playing the song from the time. Again, it's lost on me. It's someone that isn't onto music or obviously isn't around back then to remember it. But I do like that, as you mentioned, Tayte, earlier, the passage of time stuff, that music's as important as anything else to him doing that.
You notice it throughout various different points of the film where the music will become a little bit louder, and you do notice, or at least I have a little bit of knowledge of music, and you do notice the passage of time. I wouldn't be able to tell you an immediate example of that, but it does feel like as the film progresses, the music progresses. And that's not made clearer than that one scene with the kind of the blackout and, the music just playing and, understanding the passage of time through the different kind of tunes that are coming on the radio and stuff like that. It's an integral part of the film, but also it's a part of the film that goes unnoticed for most of it. And you you slowly realize by the time you get to the end, you're like, oh, wow, we've gone a long way down kind of the music tree. We started off in the 60s. We're now kind of pushing towards the 80s. That's kind of how much the music has changed. That's how much has changed in this case. That's how much, information has been kind of gathered over this time. So it's noticeable, but it doesn't kind of, heavily impact the story apart from that one scene where, they really do use it as an actual vehicle for passage of time.
Yeah, so I actually Googled this before we jumped on here, and I could have sworn there was no score for it, but apparently there is actually a score to the film by David Shire, and I Googled it because the name sounded familiar. He did the score for The Conversation and All the President's Men, but
interesting.
Yeah.
So All the President's Men's the film Fincher put as inspiration for this.
That makes sense, but at the same time, the score is so subtly used. Like, it was on the second watch, I picked up on it once when you just vaguely kind of hear it in the background. I think you hear a piano, someone hit some notes during one bit where I think Robert Graysmith's trying to get the attention of Mark Ruffalo's character. But even then, I didn't really realize there was a score to the film until I Googled it and then listened to some of the tracks on Spotify and was like, oh yeah, no, I do vaguely remember hearing this in the background. But the score, again, it does a good job of because it is made by someone who made films, made scores for films in the era that the film is set. I guess it is very period typical of those sort of thrillers and does work, especially with something like All the President's Men and The Conversation, which are very similar-ish to Zodiac, but in terms of the music that's used, I mean, I'm more into my films than I am my music, but I do like to think I know a fair bit about music, and the one bit of music outside of the bit where the screen goes black and you hear those songs, the one bit of music that's always stuck with me is the what's the song called? The Hurdy Gurdy Man by Donovan playing during the opening murder. The way that's the only real bit of music that's kind of stuck with me ever since I first watched it, because you very subtly hear it on the radio, and then as soon as the two kids are shot, it then becomes that is the only thing you do hear is the song. And again, like most of the time, unless it's got a specific use, like in a Tarantino film and the music is up front and center, I don't really notice a song or like a bit of music playing. But that's one of the first times, I think, outside of like a James Gunn film or a Tarantino film where it's used very deliberately, this was like the first time I kind of gone, okay, that song, whenever I hear that song now, I just think of that opening scene of the film. And that only happens with a couple of other songs that I can think of off the top of my head. But in terms of the use of music, that's really the only core bit that sticks in my head outside of the part where the screen goes black and you hear a few different songs playing kind of mashed together.
Very well said. Yeah, again, my music taste is terrible, so thank you for that, because it's bailed me out from my part. Moving on from the score, Tayte, unless you got anything else, sorry.
No, I've got nothing else. I was actually having a look and seeing, because this film is set from 1968 to 1983. And I thought 1983, that's got to be really close to when David Fincher started doing his music video stuff. And it was. He started making his music videos in 1984. So he would have been growing up and kind of learning kind of the film trade and stuff like that, and music videos for the music towards the end of the film. But there was not quite a crossover between his stuff, so he couldn't chuck in one of the Rick Springfield songs that he did in that year into the film, even if it would have been influential.
Would have been a bit jarring.
Yeah, I was going to say.
That's interesting. I quite like that, actually. Very well researched. Right, let's talk the legacy of this film. This is going to be really weird and interesting and great. As we always do, we'll talk box office and Oscars. Budget of 84 million, it grossed 85 million. Oscars, 0 wins from 0 nominations, obviously. I did not know about the Oscar stuff. However, Paramount wanted this out, ready for the Oscars. So that would have been November, December 06, based on the American calendar. And because of how long it was and the changes, that obviously didn't happen. Fincher has it contractually that he has full creative control. I'd imagine any other director, they're going to be like, we're releasing this film now, just like the way we want it. I'm going to blame House of Gucci. Maybe it wouldn't have saved that, but again, we've seen it time and time again. The amount of directors where their films are suddenly told now it's going to come out in December to get an Oscar push. Dune, for example, I'm convinced it's not going to come out in March. Really think it's going to be like next November. But not having a single nomination is completely blown. I'm not even saying justification, the only reason to me that is possible is because it came out in the March of that year. It probably came out during the Oscar ceremony, the Oscars run-up. And I just cannot believe that's a thing. I'm not going to sit here and say it should have A, B, C, X, Y, Z. Just the quality of this film is leaps and above this. And jumping on to the next one, as we always discussed, how is this film perceived today? Well, clearly not enough people went in 2007. And clearly the industry didn't care for it in 2007 and actually left out. Safe to say that the last 16 has done this film good. The director's made some absolute bangers since then. It's become not a name within itself. His follow-up film would be his biggest film and have loads of Oscar attention. But this film, amongst his work, I'd imagine... I'm not saying there's a top 5 of my personal preference. In respect to attention and what is discussed and what people talk about, you have a very clear top 5 of Seven, Fight Club, Zodiac, Gone Girl, and Social Network. 6 if you want to put Gongolin. Sorry, I don't know if I said that already.
You said Gongo, yeah.
Did I? Sorry.
Yeah.
This is one of them where, again, looking in retrospect to the three actors we spoke about at length today, people always talk about this film for their best films. People talk about this for Fincher's best films. I really don't care about it being overshadowed in 07 purely because we know we're not talking about this film. Like, why doesn't anyone talk about this film today? They do, thankfully. It is brought up a fair amount. So, and at the time, critics-wise, it was absolutely... not to just look at Rotten Tomatoes, but it was incredibly well received. And Fincher actually spoke about the film, basically saying that 16-year-olds didn't care for it, and the demographic audience it's not for them. They think it's a horror film based on marketing. So, a bit like Panic Room, he's going after the marketing department, which it's a pretty flat poster. I've not seen any trailers. I couldn't tell you what it's like in 2007. There was a film that released the week after this, which crushed it in the box office. I've never seen it. It's called Wild Hogs. It stars Tim Allen and John Travolta.
It's not good. It's really not good.
It was outgrossed by that, which is strange. But the week after it came out, 300 did, which was massive at the time, which may also explain why there was a dipping of sorts. But I want to just ask both of us. And again, I know that box office and Oscars aren't a metric of a film's success, but when we do these retrospectives, we're looking at these directors' careers. And it's very interesting, when you see these trends of films coming up and that the box office goes up with their recognition. I just cannot believe there's nothing on this. And what was more interesting was that when they did the For Your Consideration campaigns, they were sent a director's cut, and it's the first ever time that Paramount sent a director's cut out for consideration. But again, they're doing that probably 6 months after the films come out. It's too late.
Well, it's interesting because as soon as you said it was pushed back from kind of the 07 Oscars, from its initial kind of run, I immediately do my normal thing and go straight away and have a look at the 07 Oscars and see what it would have been up against. It would have been up against The Departed, which swept a lot of awards. It would have been up against films like Babel, Letters from Iwo Jima, Little Miss Sunshine, and The Queen were up for Best Picture that year. And the biggest kind of film that just didn't win any awards, well, those two actually, that didn't win any awards that have kind of garnered love and recognition afterwards would have been Children of Men and Pan's Labyrinth. So it was a pretty stacked year as far as kind of films trying to get their way in. I mean, even Blood Diamonds was released that year, Dreamgirls was released that year. Like, it was a lot of films. I'm just looking through the different nominations. Borat was released that year. There's a lot of films that were released that year that it would have been up against in various different categories and stuff like that. But yeah, very interesting that they didn't.
Do you want to know the year after?
Year after, it probably would
have
been
up against It would have been up against No Country for Old Men, and there.
Oh no, that's like one of the biggest Oscar years of all time. Let's not go there.
So, still, not.
It would have done better in the 07 Oscars. Why didn't they release it earlier?
I mean, you had Juno, Atonement, Michael Clayton, There Will Be Blood, No Country for Old Men. Everyone remembers most of that Oscar year. I think Marion Cotillard played Edith Piaf. I had a moment yesterday, so I wanted to detract from the conversation. So I was in the pub watching football with some friends, and I'm not a fan of rugby. Sorry, I think most people know this watching. Anyway, watching the game. It's not the team I support. It's a different one. And then Je ne regrette rien appears for like 10 seconds. And I had this moment in my head. I was like, have I lost the plot? Have I just heard like the kick from Inception? The other screens in the pub were showing rugby, and it turns out that's like the halftime TV broadcasting thing. So I just had this insane moment where it just played the song completely out of the blue, and I had no idea why. And I thought I saw the Inception.
Just going to wake up in a bathtub just covered in water.
Honestly, I went to a friend. I was like, "Did you hear that? Like, that's the Inception music." Obviously, I know that Edith Piaf is obviously predates Inception by quite a while. But sorry, I just wanted to, and again another Nolan reference.
It's because the Rugby World Cup currently is taking place in France, and they wanted the VM.
Apparently, it's the only French singer they've ever had based off that. I just wanted to say that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Let's talk something else. We've never got to do this before. The Zodiac case. How was that perceived today? How did we talk about the Zodiac case? Wow.
Loads of YouTube documentaries on it if you want to watch.
I'll tell you what, there's a lot of Reddit threads. And you know what? the one thing I think everyone knows is, had the Zodiac killer been today, serial killers just don't. I mean, obviously they do exist today.
They get
being
solved
contextual.
straight away.
Yeah, you're not ever going to have this. There's obviously like the DNA testing, CCTV, social media. It doesn't. Obviously, it does happen in this day and age, and it's horrifying when it does. And it almost, to me, because the Zodiac killer's unsolved, it's almost going to be like, I don't think there will ever be a mass unsolved killer case when they can't officially confirm how many victims there are. That it's 5 confirmed via him. It could be up to like 37, 38. It's almost like the not finale, not like it's a TV show, but it's like that like pre IT, pre Y2K, that it's just not going to happen again. I think in the 70s, or I think it might have been the 80s, where they started to introduce again more of the I can't remember the article I read a couple of years ago, but basically, this had been the 80s, it would have been solved straight away as well. It is more so that technology wasn't there, which I think adds to its illusion. Not illusion, but adds to the the mythology around it, that it's unsolved, no one's going to solve it. But at the end of 2021, I remember reading this because I was well shocked. It's the first time I'd thought of Zodiac for a long time, and I sort of wanted to rewatch it. I'm going to ask you that in a minute, but a new witness name appeared, Gary Francis Post. I don't know if that's pronounced. If he's the killer, I don't care about pronouncing his name correct. But there had been an investigation happening by a company for quite a while. They were called the Case Breakers, and they were in a certain state of America. And essentially, they'd had some new forensic evidence to tie it to this person, Gary Francis Post. However, he died in the year 2018. So even if, it's proven it was him, obviously he's got away with it in respect of that he's died before, it's been done. But the FBI sort of dismissed it, basically implying that the case is still open. I just have this image from the Dark Knight opening scene, another Nolan reference, where, when the investigation's ongoing, it's like Elvis on the wall and they just throw the paper into the bin. That's how I feel these sorts of cases tend to go these days. Not that I'm just dismissing the police forces, but seriously, what are they going to find now that they can't back then? But in this modern age, they essentially were able to look at a variety of things. So it's quite interesting that post Zodiac, there has been a new name, there has been a new case. No, there's not going to be a sequel directed by David Fincher. But I do quite like the fact that something similar, I saw JFK for the first time a couple of months ago. And obviously it came out in 91. And the version I saw was the Blu-ray, and it had been edited. They're not like done a George Lucas. Everything gets compared to George Lucas, I guess, when people want to re-edit something. But the closing credits basically were like, in 30 years, they're going to release all this information about JFK. And they had to update it to basically say, they have released a lot of information, but more will come in the following years, on the closing titles. And again, not that it would happen or need to happen for Zodiac, but it's interesting that, we get the closing titles, and obviously there has been information since to put someone else in the fold. Again, I'm there's a lot of people that are into crime. Paul, that's been on the channels a lot, is massive on crime podcasts. So it'll be interesting chatting with him at the festival, but I'm not going to ask for your thoughts on the Zodiac case being open, but I kind of am
I'll chip in. I'll chip in here.
Yeah, chip in. That's a better word.
There are, once again, like I said, there are many YouTube documentaries out there depicting kind of things to do with the Zodiac killer. And once again, yes, I have seen some of them. It still is a curious case to me because it's an open case. It's an unsolved mystery. So I love to hear people's different theories on it, different takes on it, different bits of information that come up for it. I don't go into the full wacko kind of stuff. I just kind of keep it, surface level, only with the kind of channels that kind of are known for kind of giving out decent information. I talked about it, it was a few weeks ago. I can't remember which review we talked about it on, but a YouTube channel called Lemino, which is quite a popular YouTube channel. He's recently done a video on the Texas Book Depository, which is all about JFK case. It is his most requested video to do a video on the Zodiac killer. His most requested of all time. And people are waiting around for him to do a really good in-depth video on it. But I don't know whether he ever will because, it's an open case still. He did a very good hour-long kind of breakdown of Jack the Ripper last year, which was fantastic as well. I'd highly recommend it because he doesn't always do serial killers and killings and stuff like that. He just likes mysteries. And his channel's very, very good at breaking things down, making things kind of understandable using witness accounts, using information put in front of you, and also using kind of, like modern day kind of technology and stuff like that they've used to be able to keep up with it. So I'd highly recommend that channel. But the case is still capturing people's interests. It's still capturing people's kind of minds and stuff like that. And even though for us, I mean, we're quite young, we didn't live through it, we didn't, hear information coming out about it at the time. The fact that it's still kind of piquing people's interests now, it's going to remain there for a while. It's going to be one of those cases that is still going to be talked about for another 20 years. And especially because a film such as this has gone and not immortalized the case, but at least immortalized the memory of the case, immortalized the obsession around the case. So we'll be stuck with it for a while now, but I'll keep updated, I'll keep informed, and I'll keep interested if more information comes out.
Yeah, I think I kind of said this near the start, but like even when I was a teenager or a kid, the Zodiac Killer was one of those things that I'd always heard about, but didn't necessarily know much about it until later on when I heard a few things about it and then eventually watched the film. But it is one of those, and I think we keep saying this, but I think due to the nature of it being an open case and being to an extent still unsolved, I think still gives it that extra aspect of how people wanting to talk about it because it's unsolved. People, I know it sounds a bit morbid to have people like chiming in like in groups going, "Oh, who do you think did it?" and "Who do you think?" It might sound a bit morbid and disrespectful to the people that died, but it's so, because it is in that state that it is currently in it and has been for many years. I genuinely think that is half the reason why people still talk about it, and I guess to an extent why people still talk about Jack the Ripper as well. I'm not 100% sure if Jack the Ripper ever got solved, so ignore me if I'm.
It didn't.
Okay.
They still haven't completely confirmed it. They've thrown large suspicion on a couple of people, and a few years ago they thought they'd solved it, but then they realized that the DNA that they were testing was falsified.
Right. Okay. Well, again, that just clarifies why Jack the Ripper was even further ago than Zodiac. Yet especially in England, it's one of the most, if not the most, talked about serial killer of all time in the UK. And with Zodiac, it's a similar sort of thing, just a tiny bit more recently. And I guess when it comes to like a film adaptation, I guess it, to an extent, and this is not to discredit the Boston Strangler that came out earlier this year, because I actually was one of the few people that quite liked it. It's probably one of the reasons why a film like that doesn't necessarily land as much, because even though that case went on for a long, long time, it ended up getting a resolution, and by the end of it, it's like a cut and dry sort of, okay, it was this person, we know who did it, wrap it up in a bow, and it's done. So there isn't really much to discuss outside of that. And even though the Boston Strangler is one that I had heard of but didn't know much about before seeing the film, I guess the reason why I hadn't heard about it as much as Zodiac is because it was, again, it's already solved, they know who did it, and it was kind of done and then pushed aside. Whereas the ambiguity of who the Zodiac Killer was or who Jack the Ripper was keeps it going and gives it that longevity. And I think that aspect alone makes it intriguing. And I haven't delved more into it. And like I said at the start, I do want to read the book that Robert Graysmith wrote, but at the same time, it's like I need to kind of be in the right mindset to read said book.
It's curiosity, but at the same time, it's like, do I, what kind of person am I if I read that book?
Yeah.
One thing I'll talk about the film as well. The case did reopen March 2007, which is around the time this film opens as well. So it's almost done it the world of good too. And we know that does happen with films. Probably not. There's a nicer one with the God, not Source Code. That's a different film. What's the Benedict Cumberbatch one with oh dearie me, how have I forgotten his name? The Alan Turing film.
Oh, Imitation
Game.
Imitation Game. once the Imitation Game came out, then suddenly there was the campaigns of, hold on, this country absolutely fucked over the person that was responsible for it not to lose the war. Yeah. And, nothing they can do is obviously going to make up for what they did to him with his life after the war. But it draws current events to something that should be looked at that maybe it wasn't being looked at. And, it can be a good thing about the industry when things do happen from this. Again, this hasn't been sold, it's not been issued, but they clearly were doing nothing then. They clearly just put it away, tucked it away, thought, shit, this film's come out. There's probably going to be people coming forward, or maybe people want to say your stuff or find out, so let's look busy. And it is good when films can get that out of things. It shows it's a bit more than an industry, that some good can come off things like that. Even to detract to talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a fictional film. Do you remember heading into it, all the nerves, like it's going to be really uncomfortable to do Sharon Tate's murder, blah, blah, blah. But really it was Tarantino with his alternate ending of reality, which was actually quite tasteful, I always thought, and how he wanted to end that film. Segueing away from Zodiac killings, the real life side of things, I want to ask everyone for their favourite scene before we do. I mean, whether you can pick a favourite scene in the context of what you enjoy, but best scene maybe, or most memorable moment. The one thing I want to talk about, which I haven't, and a scene I love, is the first date with Jake Gyllenhaal. Whereas, hey, my friend, he's just going off to meet this anonymous person for a tip about this killing. He's like, well, could that be dangerous? Could be. I love that scene because you've got this sort of innocent, silly cartoonist who's now getting his weird interest, thinking, hold on a minute, this could go massively wrong. And then there's tension for you watching at home as well, thinking, Christ, is Downey Jr. going to go? Could he be set up? And I love that sequence. And obviously, they do end up together and married. Obviously, it's not my account. But that's like an underrated scene without me going for the obvious, which is the basement scene.
I mean, basement scene is one that I just have to just kind of tick and say, yeah, that's a fantastic scene that builds the tension. I'm actually going to pick the final scene of the film. And it's because everything is built up to that moment just for the film to end on a stare that goes from kind of a friendly kind of smile to the face dropping and, the tension building once again. It sets kind of a lingering thought at the end of the film, and it stuck with me a lot more watching it this time round than it had done previously. So I'm going to pick the final scene of the film just for that, just for the kind of final little inkling of tension that they kind of drop in there.
I mean, the basement scene, the first time I watched the film, the basement scene was the one scene that just was etched in my head, and I was like, I'm never going to forget that. And even on a second watch, it still just packs a hell of a punch. But on a rewatch, and I've talked about this film, this scene multiple times already, but I think actually my favorite scene on par with the basement one is the interview with, I've forgotten the guy's name,
John Carroll.
Arthur Lee Allen. Yeah, like that. On the first viewing, I may not have been paying attention to that scene as much, or I don't know what was happening, but on the second viewing, it just really unsettled me. The same sort of, not obviously the basement scene is tense and suspenseful, but there's just something about the interview where it just kind of rubs you the wrong way a little bit, especially because of his performance and the way, I think also the way it cuts back to just close-ups of each of the characters reacting to what he's saying. And again, there is that final shot where he says that line, if I was the Zodiac, I wouldn't tell you. And I know he's looking at the detective, but in the way it's framed, it looks like he's looking directly down the camera. And it just it almost makes it feel like he's looking directly into your soul. And it's really unsettling. That paired with the shop scene at the end just kind of makes that character as a whole really unnerving. And I know it's not a scene, but the Zodiac has one of my favorite shots of all time, which is the overhead cab shot where it symmetrically follows it round the corner. And I know that shot is CG, but it's just and I know it's not a full scene, but I've just adored that shot ever since I saw the film, because I was like, I want to know how they did that, because I have no clue.
No, but that's pretty. I love, that's the bridge thing, isn't it? You look at Panic Room, the 3D shot up the stairs, and Gone Girl's got a few things like it as well. And it's that perfectionist where it's even going to the DP now as well. Like, I'm going to do this, and it's the famous one take from, oh god, I say it every week, don't I? And I forgot his name, Neil Patrick Harris again. It's the car one take. He's done his research. He's done some parking in the build up to shooting that scene. He did it at the first go. That shows Mr. Jake Gyllenhaal and the others that he do it first time around, he'll be right. But heading to final thoughts of the film, since the second time I was in Zodiac, much not better circumstances. Sunday morning, it wasn't like a midweek afternoon on the Lech Theatre, but I was a bit excited to watch this in a really polite way, of the sense that we're going through the Fincher films and we're getting to this point now where there's going to be some big hitters that I haven't seen a lot, which is the difference with a film like Seven, where I've seen it loads, the same as Fight Club. I'm engrossed from the opening scene through to the final scene, frustrated as the director's intentions is to be in this unresolved drama, murder film, crime thriller, whatever we want to call it. It's fundamentally a fantastic film. And Aaron, I'm going back to what we said at the very, very beginning. It's that David Fincher's got this level of consistency, which I think very, very, very few directors, if any, have maintained across a career. I'm going to make another comparison to you know who. I won't say his name, but you know who I'm talking about. There are, also done around 10 films too. So it's one of them where it's always makes it more exciting to know, this gap between what's he been working on, what's he been doing. A 4-year gap from Panic Room to this, completely understandable. The respect I have to take on something as real as this, with real consequences, with real actions, something that's technically ongoing, and to go in the approach of the not just like, on accuracy, not talking about this modern sort of thing where people talk about accuracy for different reasons. This is literally, I'm replicating every single thing that happens, the precision detail that doesn't happen in modern filmmaking. Very few directors are going to be allowed to do that, which is the most important part. And to get an ensemble cast along with 3 great leads. And I think this being made in 2007 just adds this lovely bit of context. Is like, look at the careers that the 3 leads have had that followed. Not that they hadn't done anything before, they all had. But it's sort of great that you look at what the directors have gone on, so you look at what the cast has gone on to do, and this is a staple film for every single person involved. So for me, pretty perfect, right up there with the best of the Fincher films.
It is a fantastic Fincher film. It's a fantastic film, just full stop. And I'll give it a few years and I'll probably come back to it once again. That's kind of the pull this film has. Great acting, great direction. It puts you in the moment and it sets you up with a mystery that, is going to bite away at you because it isn't solved. And I came away the first time watching the film frustrated. Second time and this time watching the film, I came away frustrated, but also happy that I was frustrated because it's exactly how I should be feeling. It did the job that it needed to do as a film. And yeah, I really like it.
I mean, I said this at the start and I still think it. This is possibly my favorite Fincher film. Again, the top 3 Fincher films for me just keep. But for a long period of time, they kept rotating between Social Network, Fight Club, and this. And then on this rewatch, I was pretty confident of like this might be my favorite because I really enjoy Fight Club and I really appreciate the Social Network. But Zodiac kind of gives the full package of what you can expect from a David Fincher film in the best possible way, in my opinion. And it just feels like the most well-rounded package as well. And it just, again, there's small moments that stick out. The film as a whole is just brilliant. I love the direction, the acting, just everything about this film just works for me. And again, we've said it before, but for a film that's 2 hours 40, it just flies by. And when a long film does that, I just love it even more because there's nothing like sitting through a 3-hour film that really feels it. So if for a film of that length to really feel that way, and I'm going to compare him to Nolan now in that both Fincher and Nolan are very good at tightly editing very long films and making it feel like a breeze to sit through. I think Nolan's very good at it, especially with Oppenheimer, and I think Fincher's best example of it is either Gone Girl or this, in terms of tightly editing everything, showing you what you need to see in a concise and manageable way that is just so slickly presented in the best possible way it could have been. I just love this film so much, and it is. Yeah, I'm glad it's because I know for a short period of time, not many people were talking about it, and it was in the same ballpark as Panic Room and The Game in terms of being underrated. But I'm glad a lot more people in recent years have started to see how brilliant this film is, because it really is, in my opinion, Fincher at his best.
Excellent. I can't sort of follow that. Listen, it's been amazing to have you on, and it's always weird when we do this podcast. It's the first time I've had you on the channel. We've obviously been in, at the times we do coming out of the film festivals like days away. We're all going to be there. A lot of our guests who just in our videos are going to be there. We haven't mapped out, we haven't planned stuff, but we know we're going to see there. Paul has been on the channel from the series. Is going to be there. Everyone's looking forward to The Killer. And what I want to kind of segue into, Aaron, is your channel as well. I'm fairly new to it, so obviously we've been in the same group chat. I know you had Charlie on for the Love of Film series. And I kind of want to just hand over to you for people that haven't subscribed. You've hit 1K recently. Yep. You did a great Q&A, which I felt really bad I forgot sending a question for. That sort of summed up the last month or two for me. But for people, we've got links in the description. We've got it coming on the screen on this as well. What are you up to? What can the people expect find from you? Because they should subscribe. There's a link in the description to do so. But just let the people know what you're up to. Twitter as well is at Gillingham Aaron as well. Yep. So different at there as well. And you can find all the socials on the YouTube page too.
Yeah. My socials, I said this in the Cinematique podcast a few months ago that I did with Reese, that my socials are a mess because my Twitter handle is different to my Instagram, and my Instagram handle is different to my Letterboxd, and it's all a mess. So I'm in the process of trying to rectify it, because my Letterboxd handle I've now changed to my Instagram one, so I'm trying to keep it somewhat cohesive. But yes, my YouTube channel name is Aaron at the Movies. I've been doing it for 8 years now, and it really doesn't feel like it. And yeah, I do videos about any film I want to talk about, any film or TV show. I have like George mentioned, I have a series called For the Love of Film, which I'm happy to have anybody on, although there is a bit of a backlog at the moment where I've now got like 7 or 8 people in the waiting list, and I'm like, I will get to you eventually. And yeah, that I don't really know what else to say. If you like this sort of thing where I ramble on about films longer than I should, you might like my channel. That was the worst pitch in the world, but you get the idea.
No, listen, YouTube, like, it's always hard to plug it because someone's like, go plug the channel. Like, what do I do to sell it? It's not easy. But listen, people should check it out. It's been great getting you on, finally getting you on the channel as well. I know you're a big French fan. I know we spoke about Zodiac before. So I was like, okay, Zodiac, we can get Aaron on straight away. And I'm glad it's been a pretty great discussion. Our longest one on the series so far. We're just under 2 hours. And the microphone glitch is sorted, as I realised to myself, which is fantastic at the same time. Aside from that, Tayte, we mentioned in the film, there's a lot. We're going to be very busy. There's a lot of things in progress. We've got Ahsoka. The Titans video coming up. The finales on Wednesday. The film festival starts on Wednesday. There's train strikes on Wednesday and Friday, and tube strikes on Friday, and I don't know what days I'm doing. I'm definitely doing the Thursday because that's when The Killer comes out.
Yeah.
We haven't planned our coverage. We haven't planned anything.
I can say that from my point of view, I'm going to be there from the very start of the festival. I'm going to make sure that I'm getting in there for the first day. The problem is then kind of every day following and just making sure that we're synced up and everything like that. At this point, we've already also said we've got further coverage coming from Jack as well. So there's going to be 3 of us trying to cover as much as possible at the film festival this year, which is going to be great. Having loads of different people coming on as guests as well to come on and review various different things. So you're going to see an awful lot of activity from us. It may be the busiest month we've ever put out on the channel. We'll try and keep up with the videos from... I know.
Come on.
But...
There was a COVID one with the Avengers stuff mixed with the Oscars, and it was daily for a month, and I almost died.
I feel like we might be getting into that territory again. It's going to be busy. Okay, it's going to be a very busy month coming up. So please keep an eye on our socials. Go follow us on our link tree. That's going to be down in the description. It may even be scrolling across the screen right now using the power of editing and magic. So please make sure that you are following us on all of those and keeping up to date with whenever we are posting out videos, whenever we are putting out content, because there's going to be a lot coming soon and a lot to discuss.
I'll be covering the festival as well. Unfortunately, due to the train strikes, I won't be doing the first day, which is
I'm wondering how many people are going to be showing up to Saltburn, because
I honestly think
I may be the only
Friday's going to be
person.
the worst. Friday, there's not just train strikes, but tube strikes as well. So that's a wipeout. And hashtag justice for Chicken Run too.
Yeah.
Thanks to them putting the screening of Poor Things on at the exact same time as Chicken Run 2.
Yeah.
But we'll discuss that at the festival, and I'm sure many of the people I have discussed their interest. But listen, it's been an amazing discussion. It's been great chatting with you both. I'm going to try and have a normal night's sleep after thinking about these murders all day, which is going to be great fun. And even worse, back to work in the morning. But
Can we clip that?
That was context.
Everyone watching at home, thank you all for watching, for sticking with us. As I said, the support means a lot as we've been doing this series. We love doing the director retrospectives. We've got plans for more of them. And again, with Fincher, it's been great so far. We will have more details on social media for The Killer this week. So thank you all for watching. Join us then, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.